Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to this Virtuoso webinar, Innovation for Transformation in Test Automation with Zero Ramp Up, which is easy for me to say. I am Ryan Thornton, a product marketer, and I will be guiding you and our panel through the next 30 to 45 minutes as we try to make like Optimus Prime and transform your organization. As ever, this webinar will be being recorded and will be winging its way to you tomorrow, which brings us very neatly to the point where we increase our scale in terms of presenters. So let's do that at speed as I let you know that joining us today will be Virtuoso CRO and co-founder, Mr. Andy Doughty.
Hello, hi everybody.
And that will be quickly followed by our resident sales engineering expert, that is Mr. James Bengt.
Right, good to see you all today. Look forward to sharing the platform with you.
I'll leave you there with a little bit of their bios on the screen. We do now know who's speaking, but not precisely what they will be saying, which can be overcome by taking a little look at the agenda. So we'll begin by having some polls. These are just a couple of questions, and it's just to get a better understanding of the people who come and see the webinars, so that we can pitch our webinars better, so that we know that you're always learning and getting the most possible out of them. We'll look at the power of Virtuoso. That'll be more on a kind of a feature level to begin with, very quick 101. Before we get into the real nitty gritty, which is how Virtuoso slots into your organization in terms of resources, culture, tech stack, and then the reason we're all here and you've signed up, if the content and copy has done what it should, is how we're going to transform organizations. So before an ado has been in any way furthered, let's launch those polls. Which I'm afraid have decided to not work. Let's move swiftly on before the embarrassment sets too much in, as I talk you through the first few slides, looking at kind of other problems and features of Virtuoso. So manual testing and traditional test automation encounter problems at a functional level when trying to deliver transformative change across an organization. So what do I mean by that? Test authoring requires coding skill if you want to test anything even slightly dynamic, which inevitably makes testing a bottleneck. If you want to keep pace with the modern SDLC, you're not going to be able to scale manual testing to reach that goal. Apps are changing. I'm sure we've seen at breathtaking speed, being updated at a huge rate, which gives you an ever-increasing test maintenance headache. And then finally, not everyone who is able to get fast feedback who needs it, see if requirements are being met and understand the testing process. The testing kind of happens in a silo when there's lots of great information that can be given to lots of different parts of organizations, which can help transform different departments, not just testing, which has meant that testing is often seen as a problem that organizations have to deal with. And it is our job today to disabuse you of that notion, if it's one that you have, and show you that not only can testing and QA have transformative power, you can also have fun while implementing it. So there are 4 areas that we, the feedback that we get from customers that we really make a difference on. And each of these buckets, I suppose, could be seen as optimizing. And if that's all you're after, that is something we can certainly do. But when you put them all together, we are omni-transformative. The first one to look at is scale. You can test at any scale in the cloud, doing tests in parallel. We use what's called natural language programming, which I'm sure James will show you later, which means that anyone, and we mean this, it does what it says on the tin. For once, anyone can author tests, but not just tests that are robust enough to deal with the most dynamic of apps. We are 0 ramp up, onboarding minutes, 10 times faster, execution 9 times faster, authoring. Our tests will self-heal. You can reduce your maintenance from 85%. Our tests behave like your users, which means when you're testing something, often the test fails, but a user wouldn't have had a problem. So our tests think intelligently. We get the widest possible test coverage. You ensure software meets business requirements. And then this last section, agility, there's a lot of buzzwords here, but they'll be explained in detail with a lot less buzziness around them by Andy in a second. But you are able to get 100% in-sprint test automation, test across the SDLC. You can even test before a single line of code is written, achieve all your CI/CD goals, and just accelerate the speed at which you develop and release. And if you think that is a lot of work to justify, well, that is Andy's job to justify it for you now, but I'm pretty sure he will be able to.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Superb. Okay, so a couple of topics I want to cover before we jump into the actual demo, which James is going to show you the platform in action. I've just switched off my video actually to just save a bit of bandwidth. But okay, firstly, let's start with the why. So we talk to organizations daily basis, as you'd imagine, all different shapes and sizes, different sectors, different geographies around the world. And so the question of why do teams want to test early in the life cycle is an interesting one. Because I think coming back to first principles, I think what we're seeing now is more organizations getting more comfortable with agile ways of working. And the ultimate aim is, so in agile software delivery, is to take an idea and get it into the hands of a user or a customer as a working piece of valuable software as quickly as possible. So taking it from A to B as fast as they can. So any activities inside of that A to B across that SDLC, which unnecessarily slow this down, obviously takes organizations further away from their goal. So examples here, so obviously we're focusing in on the QA and testing piece. And there are some prereqs which we'll put to one side. So, availability of data and environments, etc. So we'll ignore those for a moment. But, if an organization is taking the approach where they're waiting for the code to be available before they can automate their tests, before they can design and create those tests, that creates unnecessary waste in the pipeline, and it's going to ultimately slow them down. Manually testing for regression is still a huge challenge out there in across organizations, and of course waiting for a new build before you're able to run any sort of impact analysis and understand how they're going to have to maintain the existing suite of tests. All of these approaches are really reducing testing capacity down in sprints. Test cycles are then longer, feedback on quality is received later, defects ultimately found later. So all of which combines to really, the output is that you extend that time between the A and the B. And this limits the amount of development change that you can deliver as an organization. So let's take a look. So moving on to this next slide. So let's take a look at how we address these challenges, and how does the Virtuoso platform enable teams to transform both testing processes and testing practices. So key principle to cover is Virtuoso integrates. So integrates into tools. So think of the usual suspects. So your CI, CD, we're essentially an API with webhooks. So if you Jira, Jenkins, TestRail, Azure, etc., Virtuoso integrates very effectively into those tool sets. But Virtuoso also integrates into processes. So by being an accessible cloud-based platform and accessible to anybody, as Ryan said, so to business teams, to QA teams, to technical teams, including those engineers and developers, and that by being both accessible and intelligent, Virtuoso allows anyone to automate tests early in the life cycle, much faster by orders of magnitude, without creating that maintenance overhead that exists with more traditional approaches, and then execute data-driven, self-healing, natural language tests, which are business readable, and execute those across any environment and any platform. So if we look at this on this particular slide, what we're trying to convey here is, let's look at how this works within the actual SDLC, and the process that we're trying to sort of enable and empower with the features in our platform. So firstly, inputs into any development and testing process will be the requirements. So within Virtuoso, we're going to demonstrate this shortly, but having the ability to automatically generate tests from the requirements before the code's available for the application that you're testing exists, and having a one-click import to create the test structure is a capability that we've implemented, that we're running now sort of at scale across a number of organizations, and it really starts things off. So this enables that powerful sort of shift left approach, where within the requirements and design phase of your software development lifecycle, you're able to create a very good level of system test automation. So you go from requirements, that import to create that test structure, then to refine, to convert that test structure into executable tests. Again, utilizing natural language, making this available to any persona in the life cycle, and enabling to do this before that code's committed. Because as you move then through development completes, code is committed, whether it's picked up by a pipeline, some sort of CI process, or as part of a triggering from the platform, you're able to execute those tests on the environment. And by doing this, you're now at a point where at the earliest opportunity, on the earliest environment, you're running your automated system level tests and getting that real fast feedback on the quality, on the behavior of the application, and on that particular build. So at the point where I guess a lot of testing activity today generally starts, test design begins, people start thinking about what to automate, manual testing commences. Even before that point, within the platform, we're enabling teams to have automated and to have executed those tests. So the result of this means that you've now got just fantastic linkage, traceability, where you've got your requirements, you've got your results with the screenshots, with application intelligence data, with the root cause analysis data for defects. So your requirements to test, to results, to data, to defect, to fix, to retest, to deploy, all of that linkage you have inside of the platform, which is integrated into the process and into your tooling across your SDLC. So I think now's a good time to sort of move off the slides, jump into the platform. So let's take a look at this in action.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, so let me jump into the platform here, because what I'm going to be doing is sort of taking everything we've been highlighting in terms of the transformational strategic way of viewing the way Virtuoso can be used. We're going to look at inside the platform. So I'm just going to share my screen here, and you should see appearing a dashboard coming up on screen. So we're looking to one of our demo instances of Virtuoso, which we are a SaaS application. We are browser-based, which means it's really easy to deploy, to get you started. But the fundamentals really of Virtuoso is that once you bring your teams on, which you can create inside an organization, which you can create different user roles and functions to sort of secure access and can determine what those users can access. You can create projects to get started in terms of defining your testing goals, whether you want to build out testing a new feature, a regression test, explorations, and so on. It's basically the container for all of the goals within a project. But the key thing here is that even though Virtuoso is, of course, a platform, it is a sort of a tool, it's technology. It's not to think about this as simply embedding in the way you perform testing today, in terms of, typically a developer might have to lay down code and then a testing team would start putting together tests. It's not just about speeding up in that sort of frame. It's thinking about, as Andy mentioned, right back to the stage of, let's say, when you're defining the design, the wireframes, or the requirements. If you're, let's say, working with putting together BDD requirements, such as I'm showing on screen here, actually, that's the point at which you can start creating your automated tests way prior to a developer even starting to lay down code. And the way we do that is by allowing you to import requirements directly into Virtuoso. So I could take my BDD requirements and drop them into the platform, bring them in, which obviously now I've got my requirements embedded. But from here, you can also start immediately generating journeys, which are effectively the test cases inside of goals, so that I can apply those, attach them to a goal, which will effectively create the basis of the tests, which I'm then going to author. So as you can see here, by importing, by generating journeys, I've actually created the journey, so the end-to-end path a user might take, a test case. And then effectively each of the scenarios within the BDD requirements becomes a checkpoint. So for instance, it could be each time the application is changing state. So what this means is, if you think right at the stage, could be again at the design requirement stage, you've already created the framework of your test with the requirements embedded, where then really any tester, or it could be a BA, a product owner, pretty much anybody can start coming in and putting together the actual testing steps. And the reason it can be done really early on in the development lifecycle is that we don't require code or any sort of elements or libraries to be built. You're simply able to write steps using natural language programming, directly mapping back to the requirement, using our natural language programming syntax with a hint for what should be interacted on the site. So for instance, I could say, click on a home button, for example. And again, so long as you've prepared the design, you don't have to have done any coding at this stage, because this is purely let's say, the name of elements that appear on screen. And we'll look at in a moment how Virtuoso uses robotic test automation to then convert this to ensure we do capture the technical side of applications. But essentially, very quickly, I can sort of take it from the stage of having requirements, importing those, start writing my steps, so that what I end up with is a test with the requirements, all of the steps written, which effectively builds out the automated test ready to be executed. And in terms of what you can test here, I mean, obviously, we've got some very functional steps. In this case, we're stepping through a front-end website where I'm clicking on elements and going through a journey. I can do things like writing particular data elements in particular parts of the website. But this isn't limited to just doing these types of, let's say, more simpler functional steps. You can actually start writing quite dynamic, complex testing scenarios. For instance, as we talk about data here, one of the most common is to start thinking about data driving your tests. So for example, you could come in, and where you have different data scenarios to run, you could create a CSV file, upload it into the platform to create test data, where effectively all of the columns here are your variables and each of the rows are a scenario in effect. And then effectively I can come in and map that test data into my test at relevant stages. So I could start saying, for instance, first name here, last name, map in my test data. And when I do go ahead and execute these tests, I can use that test data, which means if I have 100 scenarios, I could effectively scale the test by running this 100 times with the different test data scenarios. And again, in the theme of data, you can then start doing some things like putting in place, let's say if you generate dynamic data throughout your steps, I can start looking at storing particular values. So it could be an order ID, a customer number that is generated in test. So I could store that as a variable and then reuse that in subsequent testing steps. So we're absolutely able to deal with those dynamic data elements. But in terms of executing tests, so we've talked about being able to author the tests as soon as possible. This is also about ensuring that this is set up as an automated test that can be executed as soon as development is complete. And so certainly I could execute this here manually, but actually the best way to do this, since we are a platform, since we are integrated is to look at, say, coming from a CI/CD tool like DevOps, Jenkins, TeamCity, and so on. So a part of your commits, you can go ahead and also execute the Virtuoso goals, where you could imagine you've authored, the developers have completed their code, they're committing and immediately executing the automated test. They've got a link back to the execution, which goes back into Virtuoso. But without leaving the CI/CD tools, they're able to view, was it a pass, was it a fail? If it's passed, fantastic, you've assured quality immediately as development's completed. Whereas if it's failed, we'll look at what happens in terms of getting great visibility for any resource to immediately come in and debug what went wrong. To look at what happens actually when we do execute tests. So Virtuoso does use robotic test automation. So literally as we execute, bots are deployed, which will go through and follow the natural language programming commands, which by the way can also be captured using our vCapture Chrome plugin. So I can literally come through and click to capture, and that will also gather steps for me. But in effect, when the bots do go through and follow these, a couple of things will happen, which is firstly, screenshots will be captured for all of the interactions. So the before and after, so I can see what's been interacted with, which is great for testing evidence. But in addition, the bots are also intelligently discovering all of the element structure. So the XPath, the IDs, the CSS, and so on. So you don't need resources, anybody building tests to understand that level of detail, which is why anybody, whether an engineer or a manual tester, a product designer, and a BA can come in and actually start authoring these, because Virtuoso will handle populating all of the technical side when the test runs. And what this means, of course, is by collecting this level of detail, it ensures that each time the test runs, then it's got all the different element IDs and selectors to be able to perform the test each time. But it also facilitates a function that we call self-healing, which effectively means if you're utilizing, let's say, dynamic JavaScript frameworks, or if you're using dynamic URLs, React, and so on, if it's something as simple as just an ID updating, so let's say going from 55 to 57 in this case, the elements stayed the same. It's just, let's say the ID is dynamic. In that case, Virtuoso bots in conjunction with AI will attempt to self-heal. So basically maintain this automatically. So in this case, we've self-healed, and we do that successfully in around 93% of cases. So again, it's not just shifting left and authoring as soon as possible, being able to execute as soon as possible. But when you do have dynamic elements, when you're adjusting elements, then it ensures that from a maintenance perspective, you don't end up with having to log these in the developer's queue or an engineer's queue to go ahead and fix the automated steps. So it's really powerful from a maintenance perspective. And then looking at, fundamentally, if something goes wrong, because in effect, that's what we're testing for, to either see, does it pass and we're good, or does it fail? And in which case I want to find out what's gone wrong immediately. If a step fails, we get clear indicators as to which step has failed, including the journey that has failed. But in effect, when that happens, anybody can access Virtuoso, click on the step, and you get a root cause analysis, which shows you a summary of the testing steps over time. So is it a common failure, or has it failed for the first time? You get a full rendering of the page source, so the DOM at the time the test was run, as well as the page network for the headers, the resources, load times, and also the page console logs. So in effect, and again, or rather that's linked back as well to this URL specific to that step, where in the theme of integration, you could also have a webhook, utilize one of our existing integrations into a Slack, a Teams, Jira, GitHub, or other messaging or issue management tool. So again, you could initiate from CI/CD, have the test run. If it fails, pass that across into a messaging tool or an issue management tool with a link back to the step that fails. So you immediately socialize the issue and give all the tools needed to be able to debug this, get it fixed if it's a development issue, retested, and then get, ensuring that you can release as soon as possible. So it's also sort of the speed to deal with testing outputs, where of course you get a full dashboard to report on all the tests that have been run. You can view things like the project activity for individual tests. So you get all the visibility and reporting transparently for anybody to come and access. And then if we look at some of the advanced features that you could do beyond this level of testing, just to touch on the fact that we have the ability to move into autonomous testing, which is where you simply direct the bots to go ahead and explore and test almost by themselves, where simply by providing, let's say, a URL with some directives. So in this case, I've directed the bots to go and test, click on every single link to build a graph of the application, which lays down the basis of all the potential journeys you could have. But I can also provide additional directives. So for instance, here, I'm providing an accessibility test to be able to go ahead and report on accessibility violations. So this type of testing you can literally have running on a scheduled basis or run ad hoc, where the bots are doing all the work for testing based on different rules and directives to ensure quality testing in different areas without having to have resources spend time on this. And then one other area you can really focus on is our ability for Virtuoso to perform visual regression testing, which is to say that each time you test, you can, let's say, get your application in a perfect state, create a baseline, and then if you perform another snapshot on a subsequent execution, Virtuoso will compare the DOM and diff those on a visual basis to show, have there been any changes, and represent those visually. So for instance, here I've got a before and an after, which clearly shows me changes, which could be visual. It could be based on content like terms and conditions or important text, or it could be someone's changed, let's say, links or removed some elements that otherwise wouldn't be picked up in functional tests. So again, this really makes it easy for Virtuoso to present out if there is an exception, so a change, and then either someone to review only those changes and mark those as expected and set as the baseline, or not expected, and obviously get it fixed and resolved. So it just really starts to highlight all the areas we can really increase the scale and scope of testing. Just to be mindful as well that Virtuoso is fully extendable. So you can have script-based extensions executable within tests, including making API calls or pretty much writing scripts to perform any type of function. And we also support elements such as cross-browser compatibility testing. So for instance, you can run this on different devices, different browsers to be able to test. And we also support different environments. So again, fitting in with your way of testing on, let's say, a UAT, production, dev environments, you can set up those and specify which environment you want to run your tests on. But at the end of the day, everything we're showing here, and by the way, there's lots more if you want, or there's lots more detail we can go into in other features if you'd like to have a further discussion with us. But everything we're showing is really focusing on transforming your testing strategy rather than just giving you another tool to use in the same way as you do today. So it's about thinking about shift your strategy underpinned by Virtuoso to scale your testing and ensure you can always release the best quality software sooner and deal in a very agile environment. So I hope that demo has been of use to you and you've taken something away from that. And on that point, I think we just have a couple of slides to close out for you. So I think back to you, Andy, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, James. Thank you. So yeah, just wanted to, it's a single slide here, but I just wanted to take two quite different but enterprise level examples of, so how's Virtuoso been adopted within these two client situations to transform the approach to testing and the outputs. So first example, let's take the one at the top here. So working with a global systems integrator who have been delivering is probably the largest Salesforce implementation in Europe of the last few years for a UK public sector body. Extremely sort of time-pressured program of work, very much linked to and supporting the pandemic we've all been experiencing over the last sort of few years, couple of years, sorry. And what the partner did was they had to really work very quickly to implement Salesforce real scale across a number of different streams in this program, and where they've really got advantage from Virtuoso is that although they started off, I guess, with a more traditional manual plus automated testing approach, utilizing a framework, they've looked at Virtuoso and they've realized the benefits of enabling, so moving from two teams where you're manually testing in sprints and trying to keep pace at dynamic change. And then you're selecting test cases, use cases, and automating those to build a regression pack to follow on and support releases. So in effect, the partner was working with a two-team test approach. That really drove up the cost, but also there's a lot of handoffs, which extended the test cycles. And this was proven to be a costly delivery. So with Virtuoso, we're able to, following a short proof of concept and trial, we're able to show how by consolidating this down into one more lean and efficient team, they're able now to reduce the headcount by 11 people. They're able to facilitate offshoring, which was a real target for the organization, facilitate a move to offshore much sooner. Overall, with being a much more lean, efficient, and having a healthier balance of the offshore and onshore, they were able to then deliver cost savings in terms of the cost of delivering the testing service by £3.5 million over the course of a year. And even without offshoring, there was a real healthy savings. So the key takeaways here was really around, by shifting left, by empowering the functional team in the sprints to be automating first and free up the time just to sort of carry out really high value manual testing, by covering regression so much quickly and being able to deal with just a level of dynamic change in the application, which was just continuous. They're able to sort of get in front of development, meet their release goals, reduce their cost significantly, and pass on a big savings to the customer. So that's an example number one, just working with a large enterprise application in Salesforce. Example number two, this is, again, as I mentioned, quite different, whereby working with I guess one of the world's largest technology companies. They have a e-commerce application that they take from the US, so the .com site, and they localize it into 56 different EMEA versions of that application. So it's a very large application. So you've got thousands of pages times 56, and then times a target of 18 platforms. So the testing scope was absolutely huge. It's manually tested, or it was at the outset. And the reason for this, again, the level of change is very dynamic. The visibility on what's going to change, what's going to be sort of changed within the application, or what's going to be newly added, the visibility is very short. Traditional script-based automation has been tried and just won't work. So what we've done with this particular use case is, by utilizing Virtuoso's exploration capability, we're able to direct the bots to explore all changed and new pages across the 56 EMEA localized sites, and execute pre-built specific UX layout, sort of creative excellence standards and guidelines rules. So they check today manually for 67 different things on each and every changed or new page, and Virtuoso has automated 49 of those as specific rules, so that it can now explore the application, the target URLs at scale, execute those rules, and get back the results on the quality of the changes, within minutes versus it used to take days. So all in all, it's a 75% speed gain because there's still some remaining manual checks, and it's transformed just the level of new or changed pages now the customer can be planning to push through on any given sprint. So two good examples, I think, of just how Virtuoso are using different ways with different teams, different models and approaches, but certainly the benefits being transformative. So Ryan, so hand back to you.
Yeah, so this is just, I suppose, the thing to tighten everything up at the end, and show that not only do we transform, but we also give a return on an investment. The efficiency increases are 10 times for test authoring and maintaining. Costs are dramatically reduced. The NLP, natural language programming based automation, means that anybody can write these tests, freeing technical resources. And I'm sure everybody, when they're trying to think about transformation in their organization, one of the first questions is, how are we going to get the people to do this? How are we going to quickly be able to implement this? And you can do this with the resource you've got. The speed to test, you are able to keep pace with the SDLC. You can release better products faster. And with the ramp up that we've been talking about and the intuitive SaaS platform, all of this can happen fairly, if not exceptionally quickly. Which brings me full circle to the polls, which were embarrassingly on my second screen when I tried to launch them last time. I really probably shouldn't be working for a DevOps in the DevOps industry, but there we go. I will launch these polls for you now. Again, just to highlight that these are to let us know just kind of what level people are at. So if you see the Q&A, and if a few of you could answer the questions, that will mean that we're able to get everything, optimized for future webinars. With that said, I do have a few questions coming in. It's a Q&A session. A little bit pressed for time, but I'm sure we'll get everything answered. And if not, you can always contact us. There are details of which and how to do so on virtuoso.qa. But let's rattle through with the questions that we've got. And if you have any more, please do put them in the Q&A panel. If you put them in the Q&A panel, that will keep them anonymous, which is something we like to do just to make things easy. So question number one, gentlemen. You mentioned creating tests before code. You mentioned creating tests before code is written. How does that work? That seems improbable.
So I'll tell it, James, unless you can jump in after.
No, you go ahead.
So yeah, and we do this quite frequently. So if you understand the functional flow of an application, you maybe have a wireframe, or you maybe have a requirement, good working knowledge of the application. If you understand where you're navigating to, what you're expecting to see, if you understand both the journey plus the expected, the acceptance criteria, the expected result, and you can create the test in Virtuoso because you're working in plain English, natural language. You don't need, we're not working with element identification where we need XPaths or CSS or IDs, etc. All that gets built by Virtuoso. All you need to understand is what you're trying to sort of achieve with the journey on that application.
Fantastic. And then another one that came in halfway through. Is this just for front-end systems?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Ryan and Andy. So the answer is absolutely not. So Virtuoso is basically built to test any browser-based application. So as long as it can be tested via the browser or accessed via the browser, it can be tested. Even if it's sitting on a private network, we have a bridge application to create a secure TLS tunnel. So the answer is no, it's not just for front end. This can be used for, let's say, whether you're testing SAP, Salesforce, another back-end system that's browser-based, anything browser-based, front or back-end.
Great stuff. We mentioned product owners testing. Does that actually happen? I only ask as I'm interested, but it sounds almost too good.
Yeah, I'll take that one as well, just because I've got some quite recent experience with this with a particular customer. I mean, the answer is absolutely it happens, whether it's product owners or BAs. And it's, while it does sound great, it is great and it's entirely feasible because, again, coming back to that fact, you can author from requirements in the natural language programming. You don't need to be technical, understanding any code. The only prerequisite is, as long as you understand how to actually navigate through an application and what you want to test, absolutely anybody can test this, which really, again, the transformative aspect of this is that you really can start to think about who performs testing, not just at which stage.
Yeah, you've reminded me of the case you were talking about, and I think actually it's quite interesting that we can transform relationships. For the first time, the three amigos can actually be friends, and that is, I think, quite powerful. So the next one, I think this is coming up to the end. What is the onboarding time for this? We don't have huge amounts of resources. It looks good, but we just can't take months to do it.
Yeah, why don't you take that one, Andy?
Yeah, certainly. So onboarding, it's, as you'd expect me to say, it is very quick, but I'll explain why. So the platform, it's intuitive. We kick off onboarding with an orientation session. It's cloud-based, so there's no install, no setup. The orientation really is there to enable a team to get a good understanding of where everything is, to get familiar, and they're up and running and creating tests on day one. I think it takes really a sprint before the team is productive, because they get enough hands-on time then to work on their application, to create a good range of tests, and to really start hitting their stride. And then after a couple of sprints, we see the teams being very proficient.
And then I shall just say any more for any more, or I will close the QA panel. If you are fiercely typing, try and get them across as quickly as possible. And I think we have festooned answers to all the questions. And with that, now have we just got one more in? What if I'm just a one-man team of testers? A nice one to finish.
Yeah, so I mean, really from that perspective, it really doesn't matter the number of resources in it. And in fact, I would sort of argue that with a one-man team of testers, putting in place this type of automation is even more important, because it's about the scalability of testing. So remembering that with a single tester, if you've just got one person and they're currently doing manual testing, for example, literally the limitation is probably a risk-based approach, limited coverage. Whereas get that person authoring tests immediately, which can be rerun again and again, and that resource will simply scale. So you'll have sort of effective 4 or 5 resources off that one using Virtuoso for driving automation. So again, doesn't matter how small or large the teams, it's entirely applicable and will provide returns, increasing the quality and the shortening release times.
Okay, and that brings us to a conclusion. I hope 2 things: that we have shown that you can transform your organization with limited ramp up, and we have easy adoption with results that will prove to get gains on your ROI in rather a short period of time. I also hope that we've left you wanting more. Obviously, this is a massive subject matter, and we couldn't cover it all in one webinar. But if we have whetted your appetite and you are hungry for more, please do come and talk to us. You can book demos at virtuoso.qa, and we'll be more than happy to go through things with you and get personalized demos on your application or the applications you want. And just remains for me to say thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, James. Thank you, Andy. And good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.